Hi, my name is Amitav Acharya, and I am a professor from American University in Washington, D.C. I am going to talk today about introducing an introduction to global international relations, or global IR. Now, this is a concept that I introduced in 2014 when I was the president of the International Studies Association, which is a network of academics and professionals studying international relations. And the reason why I introduced this concept and called it global IR as opposed to keeping the traditional term international relations is because this concept reflects a growing and widespread dissatisfaction among scholars and students of international relations outside of the West about the nature of their field. So, as many of you might know, international relations is a field that is dominated by Western ideas and Western academic institutions, particularly American ones. However, the world is changing, and with globalization, the rise of other nations like China or India, the subject of international relations is becoming global. But the study of international relations remains beholden to a very Western narrative, Western history, Western textbooks, Western writers, and this is creating a lot of dissatisfaction, especially in universities and student and scholarly communities outside the West. So the idea of global IR was to then globalize international relations by drawing in non-Western societies and their contributions, their ideas, and thereby enrich the study of international relations. Now, I should point out that global IR is not a new theory or any kind of theory. It's basically a broad approach to study of international relations that takes into account the truly global origins of the field. So, one of my key arguments is that international relations was not invented in the West, or whether it's Great Britain or the United States. Rather, it had multiple origins from around the world. There were ideas about international relations in, say, Japan, in India, in China, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, and Africa. Our textbooks do not reflect that because, again, they sort of speak to a very Western history, as if all the ideas and theories, such as the theory of balance of power, theory of democratic peace, theory of international interdependence, as if all these concepts originated only in Europe or the United States. Now, global IR challenges that, but at the same time, global IR does not reject existing theories. It doesn't want to displace them, but it wants them to adapt to this wider narrative and draw on the histories and experiences and voices of the entire world, both West and the non-Western world. So to do that, you have to take a very different approach to history. So most of international relations, especially again the theoretical concepts, come from Western history and sometimes from Greco-Roman history. So it's either Greco-Roman history or through that European history, and then recently more United States history. Global IR draws from global history, or some people call it world history. And in that sense, global IR draws on the life history of multiple civilizations, including Chinese, Indian, Islamic, African, and other civilizations. And that sort of enriches the concepts and theories, gives them a wider base. Because if you study international relations from a traditional perspective, you start with the Peace of Westphalia, which is 1648, and that's only less than 500 years old. history. But if you bring in civilizations and use them as the unit of your analysis or study, you have not 500, but you have 5,000 years of history. And during that period, many civilizations rose and fell and contributed to human progress. So as a study of international relations, as a student of international relations, you should be aware and familiar with that wider, longer history, and draw your ideas and concepts from that longer history, and not just from the last 500 years of Western dominance. Also, global IR recognizes diversity, and recognizing diversity means respecting diversity, different cultures, different civilizations, different political systems, and economic systems. There is a tendency in the West to view Western ideas as universal and superior, and ideas of non-Western societies as kind of relativistic and culturally specific and not universal. Now this is wrong, and this needs to change, because every society, every state, whether historically or today, contributes to ideas that goes into the study of world politics. So diversity means, respecting diversity means not accepting any particular set of ideas as superior to others, and accepting Western ideas as the only ideas that have a universal reach. Actually, true universalism or universality means respecting diversity, recognizing cultural differences, yet trying to find common ground among them. So the idea of global IR then looks at universalism as a pluralistic universalism, as opposed to a singular Western dominated universalism. And another very important fact or a point about element of global IR is the agency of non-Western countries. Again, traditional IR that we find in the textbooks and journals today, a lot of the time it talks about how the world order was constructed by Europeans and Americans, first by Europeans and through the age of colonialism, and then the United States after 1945. And the main agents in the narrative are the European and countries and the United States as an inheritor of the European civilization. The contribution of non-Western countries to peace or disarmament or development or security is often ignored. And that is a huge gap in our understanding, because also it's not, it doesn't capture the reality of international relations. So in my research, and increasingly in the research of other scholars, we find that developing countries, non-Western countries, also contributed immensely to the construction of the global order we have today, including ideas like human security, human development, responsible sovereignty, and also human rights. So these ideas were coming out of places like Latin America, Africa, Asia. I can give you the example of Asian leaders after Second World War. People like Jawaharlal Nehru, for example, contributed to ideas about liberalism, peace, and a world order. Now, we need to bring that to the play, to the textbooks, and to the narrative of international relations. Because if you don't have a sense of a non-Western agency or non-Western contribution to international relations, you don't get them the respect they deserve. And as you saw, we are left as a prisoner of this very Western narrative that we have today. So to sum up, global IR is an attempt to globalize international relations. The discipline is getting popularity around the world, but its texts and theories remain still very much narrowly beholden to Western or American culture, American history, and American contribution. And this attempt to global IR then will broaden the discipline without displacing the body of knowledge we have today, but enriching it so that scholars and students from around the world can relate to it in a much better way, in a very personal way, as opposed to just being told this is what happened in the West and this is what happened in the past and the present of the West, and you should just accept it as universal. So my intention has been to popularize this concept in various writings and speeches and other type of contributions in conferences, and this idea is growing around the world, and now there are many scholars working in this field and many conferences and panels being organized on this, and hopefully one day it will become the mainstream of the discipline and replace the traditional narrow Western-centric view of international relations. So I would like to now talk about two developments in the field of international relations that are conducive to the promotion of global IR. The first is the emergence of Chinese School of International Relations and similar approaches from different regions and countries around the world, including Turkey, for example, including India, and also Brazil in Latin America. Now, these are regional approaches that draw on the specific unique experiences of those countries or regions. One good example is the Chinese School of International Relations. For the last 10 to 15 years, Chinese scholars are developing concepts and theories of international relations that draw from the Chinese culture and Chinese history. For example, Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and also from historical interstate relations like the tributary system. And this has become quite popular in China as a way of challenging what I was talking earlier about the Western dominance, the Western narrative, the Western-centric narrative of international relations. And the Chinese scholar, for example, argued that China is an older civilization and has also a tremendous history of statecraft and conduct of foreign policy, which can only broaden and enrich international relations. And those some of these concepts and theories that develop are kind of unique. They challenge the mainstream theory of international relations. For example, the Chinese tributary system, whereby countries from East Asia and Southeast Asia paid tribute, symbolic tribute at least, to the Chinese emperor in return for the right to trade with China, implies that you can actually have a hierarchical international relations which is different from the Westphalian model of anarchic international relations. And that system was very stable and had a lot of longevity, the Chinese tributary system. In fact, it lasted longer than the Westphalian system has lasted so far. So why can't we analyze Asian foreign policy or Asian international relations in terms of the hierarchical model of the tributary system instead of borrowing the Westphalian model of anarchic international systems? So those are the kind of arguments the Chinese make. We also have development of IR in the Islamic world that draw from Islamic concepts of justice and peace and governance. We have from India international relations concepts such as the Buddhist Emperor Ashoka's doctrine of dharma or righteousness, and the realist statecraft policy of Minister Kautilya, which is really the happened much before, was written much before than the contemporary texts we use, such as Machiavelli's The Prince, and it speaks to the same kind of realpolitik. So in Latin America, the theorists there talk about the Latin American experience in development, underdevelopment, human rights, and state building, and they introduce a Latin American dimension to international relations. Now, one issue, one criticism of these regional or national schools of international relations is that they can fragment or divide the discipline. So you have different voices coming from different parts of the world, and it all sort of makes the field very chaotic, and it sort of loses its coherence. I, on the other hand, from the global IR perspective, welcome this, because these are the ways to broaden the narrative of international relations. So to be regional and national doesn't mean you cannot contribute to a global narrative. In fact, a true global narrative can only come from incorporating these regional and national narratives. So I think this is a very positive development, and it is not going to disappear despite some concerns from the West. This is going to remain very important for the foreseeable future, especially the Chinese School of International Relations. Another point I'd like to make that can make global IR more possible is the changes to the contemporary world order. As many of you know, the world order we have today, some people call it the liberal international order or the American world order. It was constructed after World War II by the United States, and it was marked by American global dominance or global hegemony. It was actually a hegemonic international order. Now, for a variety of reasons, including the rise of countries like China and India, and also the relative decline of the United States in terms of wealth and power, that liberal international order is also declining, if not completely ending. I have actually argued in my book, The End of American World Order, that the liberal order was ending even before the election of Donald Trump as the American president. And it had to do with a variety of structural changes, but particularly the global economic shift. Mr. Trump did not really hasten its end. He might have actually contributed to its to speeding up its decline by policies that are very illiberal, both in terms of politics, but also in terms of his disdain for multilateralism. But he was not really the cause of this decline. This was happening well before Trump because of structural factors, economic shifts, and also the rise of the rest, so to speak. But this has important consequences for the study of international relations, because international relations as a field was developed at the height of Western power and dominance. And it took its origin as the emergence of the sovereign state system in the 17th century at Peace of Westphalia. Now that Western dominance is at least eroding, and that would have impact on international relations. That will make international relations more sensitive to the experiences and the voices and the histories of those countries which are rising. And those countries that are rising are not just countries like China or India, but they are also the developing world in general is coming out of the shadows of colonialism and staking its claim to be agents and contributors to international relations. So that creates an opportune moment for broadening international relations. International relations started when West was dominant. Since the West is not so dominant and may relatively speaking, then the field of international relations should reflect that reality. It cannot hang on to the narrative of the past where the economic and political conditions that created that past are rapidly changing before our eyes. So if you were studying international relations today, and if you want to have a career in international relations, whether as an academic or as in the government service and as diplomats, you need to know this brave new world that is appearing before our eyes. And this is why you need to study global IR and not just the traditional Western IR. So those are the reasons why I think the moment for global IR has come, and it is going to be the international relations of the future. Thank you.